So you're here for Summer Trial Institute, which is a version of trial practice. Trial practice is a very appropriately named course. This course is all about trials. Most of law school is about appellate cases. That's not what this course is about. We will talk a little bit about the relationship between trials and appeals and the necessity for preserving your record for appeal during trials. But the emphasis for the next 2 weeks is on trials. We are going to cover a pretty comprehensive coverage of the things that you will run into in trials. Not everything, but we'll get coverage of a high percentage of the things that you will run into in trials. It is practice, though. This is a simulation course. Nobody's client actually goes to jail. Nobody actually has to write a check for $4 million at the end of our trials. Actually, I've never had anybody go to jail. I mean, things get a little hairy during trial practice. I mean, that would be like for assault, though. It wouldn't be as a result of one of our trials. We try to make our trials and our exercises in this course duplicate reality as much as possible. We'll talk later this week about how we fail in that endeavor, how we can't completely match reality. But the reason I mentioned that early on is this is a chance to try stuff. I mean, if you want to do something crazy, this is a good time to do it. I mean, at any given moment, you will have like, 1/12 of your grade in trial practice dependent on it. So, I mean, if you want to do something crazy, this is a good time to do it. Now, it probably won't work, and we'll probably talk about how crazy it was. But take this course very seriously. But the point of a course like this is to prepare you so that after 2 weeks from now, when you're in court representing real human beings, you'll have some experience with that. Now, a few of you have done that already, and that will benefit you. You know, we all come with different experience and skill sets. As I said before, I encourage all of you, if you haven't done it already, to get signed up for a clinic so you have a chance to do this stuff for somebody who is real. And there's a lot of advantages to doing that before you have to worry about things like billing and things like that. This is neither civil trial practice nor criminal trial practice. As someone who has tried, I'm actually. You may consider this a very strange thing to be proud of, but one of the few things I'm proud of in my career is that I have sat in all 4 seats in jury trials. I have been a prosecutor in criminal cases. I have been a defense attorney in one criminal case, but it got me the 4th seat. I have been a civil plaintiff's attorney, and I have most frequently been a civil defense attorney. I've tried cases to juries in all 4 seats. I resist the idea that criminal trials are radically different than civil trials. There's a few things that are different about them, but the basic skills to be effective as a courtroom advocate do not vary. So we have tried to write the schedule so that each of you will have a mix of civil and criminal cases. We try to mix stuff up as much as we can. Hopefully this week you will each have 1 direct. Hopefully this week you'll each have 1 cross. That doesn't completely work out, but by the way, you should check the schedule so that this week, between Monday and Saturday, your name should show up in bold 4 times on the schedule. Those are the days when you are a lawyer in a primary role. We'll talk about that in a moment after I do my soapbox thing. If you're not in the schedule in bold exactly 4 times between now and Saturday, it means we made some sort of mistake. Let me know. We'll get it corrected. But you're probably in there 4 times. And many of you will have additional attorney roles, but you've got 4 primary attorney roles. And we try to mix them up as much as we can. Unfortunately, we just don't have the bandwidth to give every one of you a voir dire experience. And so some of you will do a voir dire, and the rest of you will do either an opening or a closing on Saturday. I mean, everyone should be on the schedule in bold 1 time on Saturday, and 3 times between Monday and Friday. All right, so Now I'm going to climb on the soapbox, as you know, pretty much everyone in this room has suffered the indignities of having me twice, and you know that and this course doesn't end in a fashion that allows me to climb up on the soapbox at the end and talk about public policy and those sorts of things at the end of the course, because we end with our trials on Friday, and then we have a picnic, and then we're gone. So you are going to be subjected to that today. And I want to structure it in terms of why you should think about trying cases and why you should not think about trying cases. And this course is a little test for that. And I'm going to basically start with the reasons why no rational human being would ever pursue a career in the courtroom. So the bad news about trying cases. And then after that, I'll switch to the good news about trying cases. So let's start with the bad news. First, despite what many of you probably think, trial work is not glamorous. There is a huge amount of work back in your office, back in the library, oodles and oodles and oodles of hours and days and weeks and months and sometimes years of preparation for a few precious moments when you are on your feet in the courtroom. It looks glamorous when you're watching people on their feet in the courtroom and they've got their swords out and they're sword fighting, but it is not a glamorous form of work. The amount of work required to prepare yourself to be effective in the courtroom, whatever you think it is right now, whatever you think the ratio is between work outside the courtroom and work inside the courtroom, you're wrong. It's way more than that. It's just a huge amount of work. This is a part of the profession, the practice of law, that requires a huge devotion of your time. And beyond that, a devotion of your energy, a devotion of your thought process, a devotion, if you are a religious person, of your soul, of your being, of the essence of your being. You will throw things into the client and the representation of the client that are impossible for you to imagine right now. It costs that much of your life to be a trial attorney. Second part of trying cases that's very difficult is no matter how long you do this, no matter how many cases you try, you will, the last time you try a case, 45 years from now, make major mistakes. The process of trying a case is so complicated. There are so many variables to control that it is impossible for a human being to do it without screwing up. And I'm not talking about screwing up in some sort of insubstantial manner where a word comes out wrong and you replace it with another word. You will make mistakes when you try cases that will haunt you. As that jury is out and you're waiting for the jury to come back, those mistakes come back and invade you, and it's a hard thing to deal with. I mean, a trial lawyer has an amount of responsibility that is, there are certainly other jobs where people have more responsibility. I mean, if you're a general running a war, you have a huge amount of responsibility. But for, or a president running the United States or a governor running a state, those people have more responsibility. But in terms of your individual responsibility to that person that you represent, they take their lives and they put it in your hands. And that is both why you should be a trial lawyer and why you have to think about being a trial lawyer. I have told many people, and I will tell any of you if you ever ask me about it, either during this class or afterwards, if you really want to be a trial lawyer, if you really want to find out whether you have what it takes to be a trial lawyer, after this course, there are two things you need to do relatively quickly in the course of your career after this course. Number one, you have to try a case where you are lead counsel, and probably solo counsel early in your career, where you have to make the decisions. Now, for many of you, it'll take a while to get there because at first, you trial lawyers carry briefcases for other lawyers, for more senior lawyers. And that's a great thing to do too. I'm not discouraging you from doing that. You will learn a lot about trying cases by helping out other lawyers. But relatively early in your career, you need to be the one who is making the decisions and calling the shots. And you will have to learn learn whether you can live with the consequences of those decisions, because you won't always make them correctly. It's just not possible. All right, so you need to do that relatively early in your career. And if you really want to be a trial lawyer, be careful about going to work for a firm or other entity that's not going to allow you to do that until 10 or 15 years after you graduate, because that's too late. You got to find out earlier than that whether or not you can handle that. And the second thing you need to do relatively early in your career to find out if you have what it takes to be a trial lawyer is lose one. And I want to make sure I'm being clear. I'm not recommending that you ever try to lose one. You never want to lose one. But it is only after you have lost, after that fellow human being has poured their life into a bucket, given it to you and say, take care of this for me, and you have failed to do that, that you will find out whether or not you have what it takes to be a trial lawyer. And that event will rock your world in a way that's very difficult to describe until you've been through it. It is, from a career standpoint, I'm putting aside all the life stuff that's our family and all really important. But from a career standpoint, there is nothing that has rattled me more than losing trials. And I once ran for office. I ran for state treasurer. And as I think I've told you before, if somebody tells you they ran for office, please don't ask them what they want, because they are telling you, right? I mean, nobody says I ran for state treasurer. If they won, they just say I was state treasurer. So I ran for state treasurer and lost, and that was a very knee-rattling experience when your friends see you walking down the street and they go across the other side of the street because they don't know what to say to you, But it's not as bad as losing a trial. It's not as bad as losing a trial. And that's the moment where you will figure out whether you have what it takes to get back in the saddle and do it again. And please don't believe these lawyers who tell you they've never lost a case. You will lose cases unless you either don't try any or don't try tough ones. And the cases that tend to go to trial these days, because trial is now a very unusual mechanism for resolving disputes. Only a tiny percentage of the cases that are filed in court are now tried. It's now down to less than 2% of the cases that get filed. We're not even talking about all the cases that walk into offices that get resolved before they are filed. But less than 2% of cases that get filed are tried these days. And if you try, that means that almost always, if you're in a courtroom at a trial, there is something to be said for the other side of the case. There is some argument to be made. There is no trial that cannot be lost. No matter how strongly you feel about your case, there is something, if it goes to trial, that might end up in a loss. And that is the losing of a case. There was a famous pitcher who once lived in one of my former hometowns, not at the time that I lived in my former hometown, a guy named Satchel Paige, who pitched in the Negro Leagues for many years, was over 40 years old when Jackie Robinson finally integrated Major League Baseball, and a few months later, Satchel Paige found himself pitching for the Cleveland Indians, but for many years he pitched in, various forms of barnstorming baseball. And Satchel Paige used to tell, Satchel Paige probably had thousands of wins in his career. He was arguably the best pitcher in the history of baseball. And he would tell you that He can't remember most of his wins, but he could sit down and tell you about every game that he lost. And that's kind of something you have to be able to live with as a trial attorney. And that experience is one that, frankly, most human beings do not want to have. And so there's a lot of people that try to avoid that experience. Michael?
I know when I get to that point and lose my first trial, I'll remember you mentioning that. But I guess what I'd like you to maybe explain, and maybe you're going to get to that later, is what you did to overcome that funk, or to actually get back in the saddle. Because I'll be right there and be like, I remember he told me it was going to suck.
Yeah.
I'll be thinking about myself. How did you get back in the saddle after?
Well, one thing I recommend to my students, and a few of them take me up on it, is call me. I've been there. I mean, not seriously, call me. I mean, but what I did, let me tell you, my first big loss, I also lost my first civil trial. By the way, I said you got to try one on your own and you got to lose one. If you're really efficient like me, you take care of both of those tasks in the same trial, and then you've got it taken care of. But let me tell you about let me answer your question about the first criminal case that I tried. Now, I'm 31 years old. I'm appointed United States Attorney. By the time the trial came around, I'm 32. I'm the youngest lawyer in my office. So there's 13 or 14 assistant United States attorneys, all of whom are older than I am. I am not, at that point, eventually it was fine, but at that point I was not a very popular United States attorney within the office, because the career assistant United States attorney, who had been the interim United States attorney, wanted the job, but that's not the way it usually works. I like to think that when they were looking for a United States attorney for the District of North Dakota, they got Martindale Hubbell out and they decided, oh, the most qualified person in the state is Steve Easton. That's not the way it works. It's a political job, right? So I had run for state treasurer. I'd been very active politically, and so I got appointed. But that was not necessarily that popular, that popular of a decision. I mean, nobody was mean to me. I don't mean to say that. But so I go and try this bank robbery trial. I think I've told you about my bank robbery trial in the past. You can't lose a bank robbery trial as a federal prosecutor. It's just, I dare you to find another federal prosecutor who lost a bank robbery trial. But I did. It's my first trial, right? I mean, I take a case because one of the other assistants had a case both in Bismarck and in Fargo at the same time. And we had a policy that we never asked for continuance for scheduling purposes. As the United States Attorney's Office, we're always ready to go. So I said, which one do you want? He said, I'll take the one in Bismarck if you can cover for me in Fargo. First lesson is, if you're ever a 32-year-old head of an office and somebody says, I want the one in Bismarck, you take the one in Fargo. What you should say is, okay, I'll take the one in Bismarck. You take the one in Fargo. But I took the one in Fargo. 4.5-day trial. Jury gets the case at 10 in the morning on Friday. Come 2 in the morning, Saturday morning. So like 14 hours later, I get the call from the clerk's office. Jury deliberated on that case for 14 hours. And you pretty much know that it shouldn't take that long for a guilty verdict in a relatively... Now, it was actually aiding and abetting bank robbery. In my defense, the bank robbers pleaded guilty. They were our witnesses, and it was the 2 young women who were in the car, in the lookout car, and they didn't drive either. They were just in the car. The 2 guys go into the rob the bank, get in the car, and drive off. And so we've got the defendants are the two young women in the back seat. And of course, the clerk's office was also nice enough to call the Fargo Forum, which is the Casper Star Tribune of North Dakota, right? And so Sunday morning, front page. Major headline, I believe it was front page if my memory is correct. That U.S. attorney loses bank robbery case. So that night I went home and slept like a baby. You know how babies sleep. They wake up about every 45 minutes and cry. And if you think I'm kidding, you can ask my wife. I slept that way for 2 days. That Saturday morning and then that Saturday night, Sunday morning. Wondered how I'm ever going to face all these lawyers, having now just proven my incompetence, right, in my office. And so that Sunday at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I go back into my office and I decide, I got to show up on Monday and I've got to We got to move on from this, right? I mean, the one nice thing about being a prosecutor is nothing to appeal, right? It's over. We lost. This is not a hung jury loss. This is a not guilty on all counts loss. And so the case is over. So I decided that I would go in on Sunday and clean up the files. And as I did so, I pulled out a legal pad. I don't know why I didn't type this, but I pulled out a legal pad and I put at the top of the case, at the top of the first page, screw-ups or something like that. And I just wrote everything I screwed up in that trial, every mistake I had made. As I'm like going through and I remember, oh yeah, I screwed that up, and I screwed that up, and I had like 10, 12 pages of notes of these screw-ups, and then showed up on Monday and decided I needed to get back in the saddle as quickly as possible. So the same thing happened. The scheduled conflict happened 3 weeks later in trial in Grand Forks. A considerably tougher trial, and I took that one, and I won that one, and that helped a lot. And it's a little bit like being the first person called upon in the first class, in Professor Welly's class. You don't want to be the first person called upon, but once you have, that's what happened to me in law school. I was the first person called on in the first class by Dean Myers. And I made an absolute fool of myself for 45, 50 minutes. As Dean Myers and I talked about this seal and this circus, and we went around and around for 45 minutes. And for the next 3 days, everybody was kind of like, you just get to know everybody in your class, and everybody's kind of like, I think that's the guy. They're like pointing to me. But everybody else is worried about making a fool of themselves. I'd already taken care of it. And it's actually kind of freeing to lose your first case in an odd sort of way. Because the only thing that can happen the next time is that you could lose again. Right? And I sort of clung to that thought. And for me, a key part of it was getting back in really fast. I'm using too many sports analogies, but I don't know how many of you have ever gotten hit by a baseball when you're a kid and the coach, like if it's at practice, the coach says, get in there again, right? I mean, the coach wants you to get in it again so you lose the thought of, you don't focus on that thought. That was a big part of it. A big part of it for me. Trials are, I'm going to sort of continuing on with other things that are difficult about trials. And it's one thing that's difficult about this course is we do a lot of critique in this course. You have to do self-critiques. You're going to critique each other. The instructors that we bring in, really experienced, highly talented trial lawyers, are going to give you feedback. And as a human being, you are naturally, this is what your goal is going to be. Some of you are going to be up on Monday, right? Your goal is that you do your direct examination. And those instructors just like put their hands in the air and like, oh my God, that was perfect. I have nothing to suggest to you. That was the most beautiful direct examination I've ever seen. And it won't be that. That is not what you're going to hear on Monday. You're going to hear some analysis of things that you could do better the next time, of mistakes that you made. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting it to be that was perfect, right? And when I read those semester end evaluations, that's what I want them to say. They don't, right? I mean, the feedback you guys give us. I mean, of course I want it to. I mean, that's just a sign of being mentally healthy. I mean, if you wanted it to say you're awful, I think that would suggest a lack of mental health, right? I mean, so it's perfectly natural that you want that. And yet for the next 2 weeks, you're going to keep hearing about ways that you could improve. Now, here's the thing to keep in mind about that. If somebody actually did say that was perfect, this course is a complete waste of time. Because the fundamental learning mechanism in this course is to try it and then get some feedback about what did and what did not work. So it would really, it would be a waste of time. Second, this stuff, and this goes back to not just this course, but being a trial attorney. It is so difficult. You have to make split-second decisions, hopefully with a bunch of advanced planning, but at a particular moment in a trial, you have to make a split-second decision about what you're going to do next. And there's lots of variables. You will make those decisions based upon all the input you can gather, and you won't always make them correctly. It's very hard. What we're going to be talking about for the next 2 weeks is very hard. It is much harder than they make it look on television. In fact, almost everything that you have seen trial lawyers do in television and the movies is wrong. They have script writers. The script writers control all the variables. And so the stuff they do in television and the movies, I won't say all of it is wrong, but almost all of it is wrong. And a fair amount of I force you in evidence, and I know Professor Jackson forces you in his courses to go watch lawyers. A fair amount of what you've seen done in courtrooms is wrong. Just because people do it that way doesn't mean that it's the best way to do it. And beyond that, even if it's right in one particular situation, it may not be quite right in another situation. So it's inherently difficult what we're going to be doing. And it's not fun to keep hearing, you're screwing up. I mean, I've been working with a physical therapist who is trying to teach me how to run the right way. And I've been at this since about the last week of April. And I've spent 59 years on the, well, no, not the first year. I guess I wasn't running the first year. So about 57 and a half years of my life getting through the world in a manner that I thought was relatively successful. And basically every time I go and see this physical therapist, he tells me another way I'm doing it wrong. I just have this guy, I just feel, it's like this guy's on my, little imaginary version of this guy is on my shoulder. And he's sort of whispering or shouting into my ear every time I'm trying to exercise. You're doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong, 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 wrong. You're doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong, wrong, wrong. And it's going to kind of feel like that. And, you just have to not be, by the way, we actually had to start. I do it so wrong that after about a month, he decided we needed to start with breathing, which I also do wrong. And when you are screwing up breathing, you are in pretty bad shape as to any, and I'm still working on it. I'm still breathing wrong, so, I mean, it's going to feel like that. Don't get discouraged. When I go, and I still do it a little bit. I still have a tiny little bit of practice. I still go to court every once in a while, not as much as the people we're going to have in here. I mean, I did that for 17, 18 years of my life, but I still do it, and I still do it wrong. Now, I don't universally do it wrong. I think I've gotten better at it than when I was first doing it. Trials wouldn't be any fun if you could get perfect at them quickly, and you won't. Now, some of you will be better than others. You are born with a certain amount of talent for this, just like you're born for a certain amount of talent for other activities in life. Some people, it's easy for them to learn to dance. Some people, it's impossible for them to learn to dance. Some people probably breathe the right way naturally, and other people have to have their breathing deconstructed. I mean, that's just life. You're going to find yourself on a certain portion of the spectrum from people for whom this stuff comes more naturally to those who are going to struggle with almost everything. Very few people cannot get to the point where they can be effective in court, no matter where they start on that spectrum. But some of us have to work harder than others. That's just true. That's true of any complicated human endeavor, whether it's learning a language, learning math, sports, art, music. Some people start with more talent than others. Some people have to work harder. That's just the breaks. What's most likely is you'll have certain talent for some things we'll do and less talent for other things that we'll do, and you have to eventually develop the set of skills. But this is not, and many people think that this is something that you just come up with a map, you come up with a road map, or the modern equivalent of the road map, which is, the directions we get on here, and you just follow here. And then she tells you when you get to the end of the block, turn right. And she says, and then you're going to turn left. And then you turn left. And trials are not that simple. Now, they require lots of advanced planning. And then they require adjustment. Trial is all about work in advance, plan, and then adjust. The fact that you have to adjust does not mean you shouldn't plan, because the more planning you do and the more contingencies you think about, the better you're going to be able to be prepared to adjust. But it is not, it doesn't go like you think it's going to go. Even the simplest parts of trial. The simplest exercise you will do in the next 2 weeks is probably the one you will do either Monday or Tuesday. And it won't go exactly as you plan. Now, it probably will go closer to as you plan than when we get to the jury trials, which are more complicated, and to the expert witness exercises on Thursday. But just, all right, so now I want to switch to and this is sort of an odd thing to say, but the fact that it doesn't go according to plan, the fact that it's not just a series of preconceived steps that you will always be able to take in the order that you planned in advance, is also why trials are fun. I mean, you get to be the one on your feet making these calls. You get to make these decisions. And while there are huge consequences to these decisions, and while there are lots of downsides to making mistakes, you're in the game. A very complicated, very important game, and you are right there in the middle of it. I mean, when I say trials are fun, and I mean, I love trials. First day I go to trial, I am both terrified at the beginning of a trial. I mean, I go to the courthouse absolutely over the top, terrified, and excited. We're going to court today. We're picking a jury. It's really fun. Now, it's not fun like, let's go buy a bunch of beer and get drunk on Friday night fun. It's not fun like let's go to Vegas fun or let's go on a vacation fun. It's fun like, rock climbing, which some of you probably do, which I don't really understand, or elk hunting. That kind of elk hunting they do up in the northwest part of the state where you shoot the elk, right? And then the fun starts, right? Because as I've had some of your predecessors explain elk hunting to me, that once you shoot the elk up in the mountains, then the fun starts because you have to figure out how to get the elk out of the mountain before the grizzly bear gets the elk. And so you're making a bunch of decisions, right? You had a plan. You went there with a plan, but it didn't go exactly according to plan. You didn't get the elk exactly where you thought you'd get the elk. And so now you go with your plan, and you've got the elk. You put the gut pile down the hill so the grizzly bear goes, and then you try to get the elk off the hill before the grizzly bear gets the elk. That's the kind of fun it is. And some of you must think that's fun because some of you do it, right? And choose to spend your free time doing things like that. That's the kind of fun that trying a case is. And you are right there in the middle of the action, where you have planned in advance. You've come with a game plan. You've come with a war plan. And now you're reacting. You're seeing what else is going on. The bullets are flying. And you get to make the calls, and then you get to go execute them. And one more sports analogy. I shouldn't do it, but when I was growing up, my two sports heroes were Floyd Patterson and Johnny Unitas. Johnny Unitas was the quarterback of the Baltimore Colts when I was young. And in those days, the quarterbacks called the plays. Now the coaches call the plays. And they decide what the play is going to be, subject to the quarterback overruling it at the line of scrimmage. But in those days, it was actually the quarterback who got in the huddle, and the quarterback decided what the play was, and then went to the line of scrimmage, decided whether to change the play, and then executed the play. That's what a trial lawyer is. You get to you get to do the plan in advance, and then you get to make the decision. You get to decide whether to change at the last minute, and then you also get to go execute it. That is invigorating. Now, it's exhausting work, It is life where, every trial you have will take a little bit of your life. And I mean that sincerely. I'm talking about the ones you win, in addition to the ones you lose. They all take a little bit of your life, of your limited time on, or some take a huge chunk of your life. But it's really fun to be in that position to make those decisions and execute them. And while there will be the moments we have talked about where you make the kind of mistakes, I think I told you in evidence about how in my military court-martial trial I actually stood up on my feet and said the words, "I strenuously object," which is Hollywood's version of the stupidest thing a lawyer could do, because Hollywood put that in A Few Good Men as an example of the stupidest. And I was actually standing there, and as I was in the middle of saying it, I realized how stupid it was. And I'm like sort of looking, and that happens to you, but there's also the opposite experience. And if you try enough cases and put your heart and soul into it like we've talked about, every once in a while, magic happens. And every once in a while, you have the opposite out-of-body experience where you think, "Oh my God, that was amazing. What I just did was amazing. I'm not that good. I'm not that smart, but I just did that." And that happens to you too. So when I start by saying you will make mistakes, you will also have that experience. And you kind of have to live life on the edge to have an experience like that. Because part of what makes that experience happen for you is adrenaline. And when adrenaline is pumping through your veins, amazing things happen. And you will be able to have the satisfaction of saying, "I did that. I did it. It was important for my client. At that moment, she was darn lucky to have me standing on my feet in the courtroom instead of somebody else." And the most important reason to do trial work is that good people need to do it. Our system is ultimately built around trials. And even though we don't have that many of them anymore, it is still the ultimate method of resolving disputes in our system. And it only works when people are well represented, when both parties, both entities, or both individuals are well represented. And our system, which is the system that allows us to live in a place where we peacefully resolve serious disputes, depends upon good people trying cases on both sides. And when we have that, when both sides are well represented, it is one whale of a good system. It's not perfect, but it is a darn good system when people are well represented by lawyers who are throwing themselves into the case and doing the best job they can for their clients. And you've heard me say this before, but I'm going to say it again. They come to us as lawyers, but especially as trial lawyers. Almost all trials, not quite all, but almost all trials involve some form of human tragedy. People end up in trial lawyers' offices at the worst moments in their lives. And they tell those lawyers, they beg those lawyers, "Will you help me?" At the worst moment in their life. And they may tell you they hate us. They may do all the surveys that talk about how we're the least respected profession in our society. But when they come to us at the worst moment in their lives and say, "I need your help. My life is a mess." It is a pretty cool thing that you, as a portion of your career, can do that for another human being. And it hurts like hell when you lose. But I will say this about losing. even when you lose, if you can look yourself in the mirror and not say, did I not make mistakes? No, you cannot hold yourself to that standard. You will be a very unhappy human being if you try to hold yourself to that standard, because you will make mistakes. Now, you want to minimize them, don't get me wrong. But if you stand there and fight the fight for your client, even if you lose, there is value in that. Sometimes that person that you are standing next to hasn't had anybody fight for them like that in their whole life. And I mean that. There are a fair number of people who end up in trials who have never had anybody do that for them. And doing that for another human being values that human being and says to that person, you are a person, I'm sorry we lost, but I did everything I could. When I say everything, I'm not talking about everybody understands. I'm not talking about unethically. I'm talking about everything I could within my duties, within my ethical responsibilities. I have done that. And I know how corny the next thing is going to sound. But the life of the trial lawyer is summed up in that song from Man of La Mancha. It's actually called The Quest, but we know it as To Dream the Impossible Dream. And the line that sums up the life of a trial lawyer is, to be willing to march into hell for a heavenly cause. That's what trial lawyers do. Trial lawyers say to their clients, I'm fighting for you. And they take on all sorts of burdens, and people hate them for it. The public hates trial lawyers for doing it sometimes. The judge hates trial lawyers for doing it. The opposing counsel sometimes hates the trial lawyers for doing it. But that is so difficult and so amazing to do that. And I mean, they will make your life hell sometimes. I am right now trying to help one of my former students whose life is being made hell on earth because of what she's doing for her client. The whole damn world is coming onto this young lady. And she is not the most talented person starting out that I ever saw as a trial lawyer. She's not the most articulate. She's not bad in either category. I mean, she was somewhere right there in the middle. She has willed herself to become a good trial lawyer. And she has two things in abundance that every trial lawyer needs to have. She has a stunning capacity to work. She works like a dog for her clients. And she has guts. They are right now, well, not Sunday, but they will start again tomorrow, trying to ruin her career and take her law license away because she's standing there fighting for her clients. And you just can't beat that. Understand that if you pursue a career in the courtroom, some version of that, hopefully not as dramatic as she's going through right now, is probably going to happen to you at some point. Somebody is going to be very upset with the fact that you are standing there fighting for somebody else. And will do everything they can to get you out of the way. And I just don't think you can beat that. They are never going to love us. They just are never going to love us collectively. But people don't usually hate their own lawyers. They usually love their own lawyer. And understand that the people in the world, including people that you care about, aren't necessarily going to get this. They don't understand it. You've probably already heard it a million times. How can you defend a guilty person? You've probably already heard that through 2 years of law school, because to the public, that's the epitome of why lawyers are dirtbags. They would actually go into court and represent someone who did it. Yeah, we do. That's what our system is based upon. That before we take somebody's liberty or life or property away, somebody stands there and says, you may do it, government, but over my dead body. I'm going to fight the fight first. And that's why we can sleep at night with that system, because we've got people fighting like that. All right, some other things about the first year of law school. At some point, it might be 3 days from now, it might be 3 weeks from now, it might be 3 months from now. Almost every one of you is going to have the following experience. I'm not getting it. This stuff is not making sense to me. And the worst part about it is, and it seems like everybody else is getting it. All right, here's a couple things to understand about that. No, they aren't. The way we think in law school, the way we think in the practice of law is so different. It's learned behavior. It is different from other life experiences. Law school is an inherently very difficult exercise. It will seem like, no, everybody else is getting it and you aren't. They probably aren't. Actually, there's one or two of you whose brains are going to be wired in some way that sort of matches up with the way lawyers and law professors and law students think, and you'll get it quicker than the others. It's not. By the way, it doesn't mean that if you're the child of lawyers, that doesn't. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be that person. Some people will get it a little quicker than others, but pretty much everybody struggles. Don't give up because you're struggling. It is going to happen. And I'm saying that to a group of people who is not used to struggling in the academic environment. Right? You are here because you have always been successful in an academic environment. But I can tell you, I've had in my teaching career, I've had about a dozen, just as one example, I've had about a dozen practicing doctors as law students. Pretty much every one of those people has come up to me and said, this is way harder than medical school. That this is, I just don't get, these are people that are very successful academically. And then eventually you will get it. So, I think in terms of holidays, so when might you get it? I think most people start, this way of thinking that we have starts to become second nature to them somewhere between New Year's Day and St. Patrick's Day. That's when most people start to get it. Now there's an unfortunate part of that, which is you have a whole slew of exams before New Year's Day. Right? So that's, you have to survive those exams before you're fully getting it. And then all this stuff we're doing, this thinking like a lawyer stuff, somewhere during the second semester for most people, starts to become second nature. There's still a lot of work. There's still 2 more years of work. But it's not going to make sense. It's like learning a foreign language if you're not very good at learning foreign languages. Like some people are good at learning foreign languages, I'm not. Just hang in there, because eventually it's going to start. It's going to start to make sense. The old theory of law school, describing the 3 years of law school, used to be, and there's 3 things. So first year, second year, third year. First, they scare you to death. Then they work you to death. They being the professors. That's the professors, right? First they scare you to death, then they work you to death, then they bore you to death. That's the classic view of law school. First year they scare you to death, second year they work you to death, third year they bore you to death. You are very fortunate to be at a law school where you do not have the luxury of being bored to death your third year, because we have a full slew of clinics. So we're going to work you to death as third years too. In a practice environment, there are very few law schools that guarantee you a spot in a clinic in your third year. We do at this law school. We don't require you to be in a clinic, but you would be foolish to graduate from this law school without having the chance to first practice law under the guidance of a faculty member. When you're not worried about things like paying the bills and whether you can hire help and paying for your own malpractice insurance, we do all of that for our clinics. We run 7 law firms out of this law school called clinics, and you really want to take advantage of that. So we actually scare you to death, work you to death, and work you to death again. That's what we do. And you want to think about things like the Summer Trial Institute, which you'll be participating in some fashion on Friday, where we also work you to death. So our sequence is a little bit different. All right, I am relatively quickly to be out of time, so let me get to what I see as the point. Every one of you is extremely bright, talented, and hardworking. You wouldn't have gotten here without that. This is one of the smallest law schools in the country. Very often we are literally the smallest law school in the country. We are quite selective in our admissions process. You have the talent to make this happen if you put in the work. And you could have taken that talent and gone all sorts of other places. Places where you could have used that talent, those brains, and that hard work to make more money than you're going to make as a lawyer. But you chose to come here. You chose to become a lawyer. And a lawyer is someone who throughout their professional career puts other people's lives ahead of her own or his own. That's what lawyers do. And you, as lawyers, you will represent the rich and the poor, the powerful and the powerless, and some of you, the really special ones among you, will represent the smelly and the despised and the ungrateful. Because some of your clients will be very ungrateful for what you do for them. Because that's what lawyers do. Lawyers stand next to other human beings and say, I'm going to fight like hell for you. Even though people are going to hate me for it, even though my own family sometimes is going to say, what are you doing representing that person? That's what lawyers do. And because you've chosen to become a lawyer, you are now starting on the first steps of the 3-year process of law school, which is intellectual boot camp. It's really hard. If somebody tells you that law school isn't hard, don't trust them. They'll lie to you about other things too. It's really hard. What you're going to do, and the practice of law is really hard too. Nobody should have any misunderstandings about that. This is not an easy path you have chosen. But if you use that brain you came here with, even though we're going to try to redesign it a little bit during that boot camp, but if you use that brain and you put in the work, 3 years from now, you're going to be in an auditorium and you're going to walk across a stage and they're going to hand you something at graduation. And you know what happens at that moment? When you graduate from this law school, you become eligible to take the most rigorous professional examination in our society, called the bar exam. Right? That's what happens at graduation. Then if you put your work into the bar exam, sometime later that fall, you will be in a courtroom and a judge will ask you to raise your hand in the air to swear to defend the Constitution of the United States. And at that moment, at that incredible moment,
you will become a member of the most hated profession. And here's the thing you want to remember about that. And we are, for all the other things lawyers are, we are the single most hated profession in American society. But here's what those people don't tell you. When human beings are at the lowest point in their lives, they go to lawyers. They don't need us when things are going well for them. They come to us as lawyers when they have been the victims of crime, when they have been accused of crime, when they've been in an accident that has put them in a wheelchair for the rest of their life, or when they have been accused of putting someone in a wheelchair for the rest of their life through their misbehavior. That's when they come to us, at the very worst moments in their life. And they say to lawyers, I need your help. And never, ever forget what a huge honor that is. They ask us to save their lives. Not the way doctors do, but in a very, very real way. They come to us at the worst moments in their life. And that's what you get to do as a lawyer. And it's really special. It's really hard. It takes a lot out of you. But I'm so proud of you that you've chosen that path. And one last thing, and I'll ask if there's any question. One last thing is they will say that they hate us. But what we, the lawyers and the judges and the other people that work in the legal system provide is a place for people to go in our society to peacefully resolve very serious disputes. We are at the fabric of a civilized society. And don't kid yourself. There are millions of people alive today that don't feel like they have a system to go to peacefully resolve their disputes. And you know what they do to resolve disputes? They strap bombs to themselves and put themselves on school buses full of children and blow up school buses. That's what happens when people think that there is not a system to peacefully resolve disputes. So what we do, what you are going to work so hard for the next 3 years to become a lawyer, is there's no higher calling than that. There just isn't. And they will try to beat you down. Some of the people you care about will challenge this decision you've made, but be proud of it. It's really, really special what we do. So hang in there and always be proud of what we do. They're never going to love us, but they should. All right, so we got 5 minutes. I'm here to take any questions on law school or being a lawyer. Or I spent 17 years as a full-time lawyer before I started teaching, and I still do a little bit of practice of law. Sure.
So what do you do to keep your head in the game or to stay sane with all that around you?
Well, you need a little space for the people, for you, and you need some space for the people you love, but probably not as much as you would want to have. Lawyers work really hard, so you got to, for me, the thing about being a lawyer is, the number one thing is helping people. We've already talked about that, but I'll tell you the selfish one. You want me to tell you the selfish one? There are moments, and my emphasis is on trial work. I do trials. I still do trials occasionally, and I teach about trials. So I'm going to give it from the standpoint of a trial lawyer. Trial lawyers, huge amount of work. Everybody thinks it's glamorous because you're on your feet, but for every minute you spend on your feet, you've spent weeks and months getting ready for it. It's not nearly as glamorous as people think. And the downside of being a trial lawyer is because everything's happening at once when you're trying a case. There's all kinds of things to keep track of. And so the downside, which is not what you asked about what keeps you going. I'm going to get to that, but I'm going to get to the downside first. The downside is every once in a while you do something at a trial and you think, just after you do it, or sometimes even as you're doing it, it's like, I can't believe I'm that stupid. I can't believe I did that. And even as you're doing it, you recognize it's a mistake. But the upside is, every once in a while you have this out-of-body experience. I'm thinking of a witness I cross-examined in a trial about 3 years ago. It was just going great. It was, this witness deserved to be filleted. I was filleting her. There was blood all over the floor. On behalf of my client who needed this to happen. I mean, it's not just for the sport of it, but as it's happening, it's like, yeah, because I said before, there's sometimes you think, oh, I can't be that stupid. And there's also sometimes you think, it's kind of this out of body, you see yourself over here and it's like, dang, he's pretty good. And the other thing that happens is, as a trial lawyer, losing is awful. Winning, it's just amazing. It's just amazing. You have to learn to deal with the gulf between those things. Both things are going to happen to you, right? I mean, you can pour your whole guts into somebody's case and you can still lose it. And that's really hard to deal with, but oh man. And it's about them. That's way more important than what I'm talking about now. But for me, if we have a chance to talk, and I've got about, I don't know, maybe a dozen moments that I'm not going to trade for anything. Other people have made a lot more money. I've got like a dozen moments that, and you know what? That's not a bad deal. At the end of, I've been doing it 37 years. A dozen amazing moments. Verdicts coming back the way I wanted, or a really appreciative client. Most of them aren't that appreciative, but the ones who really are, that's a big part of it for me. And being able to walk away and say, I helped. There's a couple of people, not a lot, more than a couple. There's a few people out there whose life I saved. And I'm sorry for how egotistical that sounds. You could have done it. I'm not saying other people couldn't have done it, but it was me, and I poured my guts into them, and I saved their life from what could have been very different circumstances for the rest of their life. So that's a big part of it for me. And you're going to have to find your own thing about it that keeps you coming back. Also, and the other thing is, I say it's a lot of work, but it's also fun. I mean, you've got to want a challenge to be you. If you want life to be easy, this isn't the place to be. And you'll hear me use this analogy again because you'll have me for class later on. Not this year, but second and third year. You can't avoid me, unfortunately. You're stuck with me 2 times as a second year under the current schedule. So you'll hear this from me again. But practicing law is fun. It's a lot of work. It's like those of you who are mountain climbers or hunt elk. And you shoot the elk, and then you try to get the elk out of the woods before the grizzly bear gets it. It's not easy, right? I mean, if that's your definition of fun, it's not what other people. It's not easy, but it's a challenge, right? And it's hard, and you have to think your way through it and plan, and then you've got to adjust to the actual circumstances that actually happen. And that's a lot of work, but it's also a lot of fun, I think. So hopefully you enjoy that kind of a challenge, because that's what you're facing. All right, I'll see you in 1 year and 4 days. 1 year and 6 days in evidence class. You've made a great decision on where to go to law school. This is not the law school I went to. This is not the first law school I taught at. This is a really special law school. Unless you want to be anonymous. By the way, if you wanted to be anonymous, this is a bad place to be anonymous. Because it's small and we know each other, we care about each other. Other than that, everybody should come to this law school. The opportunities you have are amazing. Please take advantage of them. They do require work, But there's amazing opportunities for our students. And congratulations on being here. Hang in there. You'll get discouraged, but don't get too discouraged, because everybody you look at as a lawyer had those moments and thought, I don't belong here. I'm telling you, everybody did. So don't let those defeat you. Hang in there, and I'll see you in 1 year and 6 days, 8 o'clock in the morning, evidence class. That's how the second year at this law school starts. So thanks a lot.